Now to Tunisia. By contrast, Tunisia is embarrassingly older than the United States. When Columbus stumbled on Haiti, Tunisia was already 2,000 years old. When Christ was born, Tunisia was 800 years old. And the reason was that there was a people who now call themselves Syrians, who in those days called themselves Phoenicians, sailing west through the Mediterranean, stumbled on and then founded a city called Carthage. It was 800 BC. Since then, other people found out something the Phoenicians had already found and followed them up. Now, just to give you a sense of a tiny whiff of the kind of history that Tunisia has been through, these people who followed the Phoenicians were, the Berbers were already there. God knows where the Berbers came from. Perhaps our speaker will tell you. Then came the Carthaginians, the Romans, the Normans, the Vandals, the Greeks, and the Persians. This is all BC. Only in the last 200 years have we seen the real either invaders or business people or empire-minded people, and they were the French, the Italians, the Arabs, the Turks, the British and the Egyptians, the Spaniards, the Greeks, and even the Maltese. Now I ask you, was the word multicultural invented for Tunisia? So they beat us on age, and they beat us on multiculturalism. Their religions involve Muslims, Christians, and Jews. In the early 20s, there was a little toying with communism. I suspect a little toying with fascism, considering their relationship with the Italians. But in the middle 20s, 1924, 1925, there was a movement for democracy, began in Tunisia. It is still working its way through, I gather, and very promising. I suggest to you that a country like this, that has the background it has, compared to the relatively measly background historically we have, measly multiculturally that we have, in the next few years, given the rise of Islam, the rise of the Third World, and the crumbling or whatever it's doing in the first, so-called Second and First World, we're going to be listening to these people very closely. And maybe we better begin tonight. Let me tell you who your speaker is, or has been. He was born in Tunis. He went to school and college there. He went to Columbia, where he got a degree in international relations. In the 60s and 70s, he had a number of jobs involving economics and finance. In the late 70s and 80s, he came into his own. He became ambassador to Tunisia, to Japan and South Korea, ambassador to Belgium, ambassador to the United States, Mexico and Venezuela, while living in Washington. In 1991, he was appointed Minister of Foreign Affairs. We also have a former Minister of Foreign Affairs in our presence, and he is Ismail Khalil, the current ambassador to Washington. So now I give you, with great satisfaction, the gentleman who's going to speak to you on Tunisian perspectives on the post-Cold War order, democratization, Middle East peace, and the free market. His Excellency, Monsieur Habib ben Yahia.
What an introduction, Mr. Chairman. I'll add to it a few comments. The Tunisians were good sailors. They even reached your shore, Baltimore. The second envoy from Tunisia, ambassador, came in 1865 representing the king of Tunisia at that time, with a copy of our constitution, the one you referred to, started very early in the 19th century, with a big portrait of the king of that time, still in one of the State Department room. Couldn't fit in any room because it's a huge portrait. An Arabian horse, which created quite a debate within the Congress, because it couldn't be allowed to be given as a gift to the President of the United States of that time. So the poor horse was left in one of the area over here. Unfortunately, he died before the Congress gave the green light to be delivered as a gift. Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor for me to speak to you tonight, 21st floor, looking at the 21st century ahead of us in a city that I'm familiar with, that developed tremendously. It's quite a change. Congratulations to the city planners. Since we are looking at the 21st century, and you're talking about old countries, I hope that the recipe I'm going to give you would be interesting, to look at the 21st century with a lot of wisdom. You don't lack wisdom. With a lot of insight, and you have it. With a lot of farsightedness about the real dimension of the problems that the whole planet is going to be confronted with for the next century. To put these into perspective, let me give you a flavor of the Tunisian-American old relationship. The first treaty between the two countries was signed on March 26, 1799. It was ratified by the US Congress on January 10th, 1800. The first American consulate was established in Tunis on January 20th, 1800. In September 1805, a Tunisian special envoy was received by President Thomas Jefferson. In 1865, after the Civil War, another ambassador was sent to the US, the one I was speaking about, came to Baltimore with a message of friendship to the American people. During Tunisia's struggle for independence, leaders of our national liberation movement established very close relationship with US administrations. At the end of the French rule in 1956, when we got back our independence, the United States was among the first countries to recognize the independence of Tunisia. Since then, ties of friendship and cooperation have grown stronger and stronger within the framework of mutual understanding and common adherence to the ideas of and values of liberty, democracy, and free enterprise. Both countries have worked closely together for the promotion of peace, stability, and progress. Mr. Chairman, you referred to the location of Tunisia. It's a tiny dot in the Mediterranean. The forefinger pointing to the Italian boot. And between the two, a lot of things happened. The Strait of Sicily. Believe me, we have seen them all come and go. Now we have a more modern word about invaders. They are very kind tourists. We have about 3.5 million tourists a year. their stay is shorter than the ones we used to have before. So this richness of our history made out of Tunisia a small melting pot. We spoke Latin. We spoke Phoenicians, of course. We spoke Arabic. We still speak Arabic. We spoke French. We still speak French. From Christianity to Islam, the country adjusted itself to a multicultural nation. And I think this characteristic of Tunisia, with now 8 million inhabitants, give it a more important role that is not in conformity proportionate to its dimension. We have been there during the Punic Wars, rivalry between Rome and Carthage, almost 100 years of wars. The peace treaty was signed factually and actually was signed in 1986 between the mayor of Rome and the mayor of Carthage. It wasn't too late to make peace between these two cities. We were then in the midst of the action during the First and the Second World War. A number of American boys were killed on our soil to defend freedom. We still have US cemetery being taken care of as a symbol of this country's commitment to freedom. Let me remind you that the United States committed more than 400,000 of its soldiers to liberate North Africa from Nazi Germany. This is an important figure to remember. More than 6,000 soldiers were buried under Tunisian ground. So we value this commitment of this country to defend freedom. So in our modest way, due to the support we have received from this nation during our liberation movement, at a time when the United States had, and still have, excellent relation with the French, but whether at that time, US administration did adopt a position of principle in supporting Tunisia's independence. It's a matter of right for self-determination. So in view of what the United States has done for the region and for Tunisia, we now perceive ourselves of having a role to play after the end of the Cold War. Used to refer to that period from Yalta to Malta, the last summit between President Bush and former President Gorbachev was in Malta. So from Yalta to Malta, a lot of things are happening, which puts Tunisia in a very sensitive spot. How to deal with security in the Mediterranean, how to deal with democratization of the Mediterranean region, how to deal with development challenges, how to deal with stability of our region. And I think on those three concepts of security, stability, progress and development, Tunisia has a say, a modest say, in the formulation of the new Mediterranean order. Security. It implies a thorough appraisal of the existing and developing threats and potential risks, at the same time strengthening links of good neighborly relationship, as well as search for less disparity in economic growth among nations bordering the Mediterranean. Security used to be ensured within what was called the balance of power or the balance of terror. One good thing about the changes after the Cold War, nobody's talking about balance of power or balance of terror. People are talking about balance of interests. How to do it? And I think Tunisia's approach to security on the basis of balance of interest, taking into account first the progress of democratic process in the region. Let me remind you that it took few years, let me say, to Portugal, Spain, and Greece to follow up the Western democratic experience after a long period of their own experimentation of other political regimes. Now, North Africa has started within this global changes of the world to think and act and redirect our political regimes according to the democratic values. Tunisia started first in 1987, after the very soft change of power, transfer of power from our first charismatic president who served his country during the liberation movement and afterwards, and could not help it but to grow old. With old age also grew problems. So according to our constitution, the prime minister took over and became the second president. Our first president is still treated with dignity, respect. His family is with him. His son is a very prosperous private businessman. Let me remind you that history is repeating itself. In 57, I told you we have kingdom. We used to be a kingdom. The old king in 1957 grew old, could not rule. The parliament, the first parliament of Tunisia, independent Tunisia, passed a bill asking the king to step out and have a nice life. A delegation from the parliament went to see him, respectfully presented the bill. He accepted. Not a single drop of blood, no trials. The princes of that time are prosperous businessmen in modern Tunisia. This is the way we do it. And that's, Mr. Chairman, probably some of the weight of history that gave us this civilized way in looking at changes in the country. So democratization is starting. 7 parties competing. We have to set the rules of the game you have 2 centuries of democracy. We are beginners. If you can sell me instant coffee that make me grow democratic all of a sudden, I'll buy it at any price. It is a question of education, checks and balances, institutions, freedom of the press, how the press would behave, would react, how the people would debate in the democratic debate. So it's a culture, it's a mentality, it's a new reflexes to be given, fed to the young generation. We don't think in Tunisia that the genes of the Tunisian or North African cannot cope with democracy. There is nothing wrong in our genes. And democracy is universal value that can grow, nurtured, but also protected from challenges. Challenges, and there are many of them in the region. Look around. Challenges where in our region stability, and Tunisia did set a record of stability, democratic process, and Tunisia is setting the record for democratization of its institutions and progress, economic progress, in privatization of our economy. Tourism started to be privatized since 1972. And by the way, to give you a figure of the projected rate of growth of this year would be the highest in the region, 8.4%. After the aftermath of the Gulf crisis, this is quite a performance. So this, on the side of security, understood in its global meaning as domestic security as well as external security. As we developed dialogue within, democratic dialogue within the country, we started since 1987 developing dialogue with our neighbors. You cannot change your neighbors as you can't change members of your family. You have to live with them. We believe in non-interference, and we kept the doors of dialogue open. We solved a number of problems. We even started in 1989 to have a group of 5 nations seeking regional integration, especially in the economic field. The next door neighbors, the European Economic Community, is going to be a huge market with which we have a number of interests. More than 75% of our trade is done with the EEC. So this Maghreb grouping will be dealing with the EEC to improve the kind of economic trade relation we have developed for ages with Europe. And also, we are trying, because of security, to play a role in the Middle East process. I'll come back to it. One of the other challenges I refer to is how to protect the emerging democracy in Tunisia from extremism, fanatism, and radical type of reaction sometimes disguised under the name of religion. We are proud to be religious, Muslim majority. We are Sunni. As you remember, they are Shiite and Sunni. We are Sunni Maliki. That means one of the most important sect in Islam, which is on a moderate line, trying to have a demarcation line between politics and religion, between mosque and state. And along our history, since our independence, we tried hard to make that separation without creating any problem for our religion, because it's a very tolerant religion. To be a good Muslim, we have to believe not only in our prophet, but in all preceding prophets, including Jesus, Moses. This is the kind of religion we believe in. But of course, winds from shores far from North Africa blew and came with another interpretation, another ideology of militant type of fundamentalism that is trying to blur the picture, both for religion and also for democracy. When they come to Western countries, those groups, they are super Democrats. They talk about democracy. And they even try to present themselves as the best defenders of Western interest in our region. But we know their dual language. We know what they say when they go to other countries, trying to shape a state based on religion, believing in one man, one vote, but one time. We are outspoken on this issue because this minority started to destabilize Tunisia with even acts of violence. Again, Mr. Chairman, that Tunisian old recipe, sense of vulnerability, the reflex started functioning again to protect our society from this virus. And the treatment, the medical treatment, is not only on security side, but also on education, economic development. We introduced in the police academy, judge academy, military academy, journalist academy, university courses on what democracy means, courses about what means respect of human rights. This is the way Tunisia is trying to protect itself, but also project its democracy. Next November, with UNESCO, we're going to have a big conference, World Conference, on education and democracy. You don't think about it, because you're nursed for centuries on these concepts. We want to learn more and have it included in our mentality and reaction. As far as religious extremism, Tunisia has solved this problem, as I told you, within the respect of human rights, and even changing in some of our institutions the basic law governing those institutions. In 1994, we're going to have general election, and I hope as we succeeded in competition in the economic field, we will succeed competition in the political field among the 7 parties. Now coming to the Middle East process. You remember certainly that Tunisia was an outspoken country on this issue. 1965, Tunisia was the first country to say loud and clear that peaceful coexistence is the only solution for the Middle East drama. And reference to the United Nations resolution accepting both Israelis and Palestinians within defined borders should be the only reference for a peace process. It was too early. Tunisia's cry wasn't heard. We don't want to say that we have the right of ownership on those ideas, but let me tell you that when we started in the 80s within the Arab League that in 79 came to Tunisia, remained there 11 years, and our input modestly was heard and was positive. So the Palestinian wanted to settle the issue through negotiations, and Tunisia was there when asked to give the right counsel and advice. We were there when Secretary Jim Baker started his long pilgrimage throughout the Middle East, the double-track peace process. We were there in Madrid. We were in Moscow for the multilateral talks. Are we following the bilateral talks with a lot of interest? Of course, we would like things to develop according to the only references for a quick and just solution of this crisis. That means Security Council Resolution 242 and 338 that were accepted as the reference for the whole peace process. But we understand that it's a long process. I hope it won't be too long, because history cannot wait, because the 21st century is around the corner, and because there are other compelling challenges to the area. Challenges of development, challenges of redirecting investment in more productive things, not in an arms race in which Tunisia didn't believe, but in economic progress, in cooperation between free nations. Ladies and gentlemen, I made this introduction to excite your appetite for questions. I can talk even longer on issues of Tunisia's economic development, investment opportunities. This year, private foreign investment increased by 52%. Confidence is building, and we hope that Tunisia would be the, I won't say Korea, but Singapore of the Mediterranean. There's plenty of opportunities for US businessmen to seek and to do business in Tunisia. We are 1 hour flight from Rome, 2 hour flights from Paris, and we have a long reservoir of skilled labor. Ladies and gentlemen, this is an introduction of the old, tiny Tunisia that wants to grow stronger, a good friend to your great nation, and also contributing to security of the Mediterranean, which is very important to the United States. But beyond security and democracy, there's one dream we are thinking about: reconciliation between the three religions that started from that sacred land: Judeo, Christian, Muslim reconciliation. Thank you for your attention.
Mr. Ambassador, we thank you for your very comprehensive and thorough introduction and your earnest and serious introduction as a basis for our questions. And the question was, how does Tunisia justify the harboring of terrorists on its border especially after they've been thrown out of other countries?
Let me first of all tell you that Tunisia has always condemned terrorism for whatever motives, whatever justification. This is on record. I want to stress it again and again. Your question deals with a very complex issue. Let me put it into historical perspective. You remember 1982, don't you? Invasion of Lebanon, bloodshed around Beirut. Late Philip Habib, God bless his soul, had a plan to disengage forces and also to try to bring back peace to Lebanon and stop the bloodshed. Tunisia was asked in 1982, and I was ambassador in Washington, witnessing that. My friends in this country, friends in Europe, try to alleviate the burden of the Lebanese by taking the political leadership of the Palestinian liberation movement. And on that ground, we accepted. We never authorized any planning of any terrorist activities out of our land. Between 1982 and 1989, the fresh air of Tunisia and the Mediterranean did help in convincing all parties that peace is the name of the game and peaceful negotiation. And that was a turning point in '89, and the whole process started by a dialogue between the Palestinian and the American in Tunis, up to the present peace process initiated by this country. So I think you have to put Tunisia's decision into perspective, because we believe in peaceful solution of conflicts, and because we have, since the 60s, said loud and clear, it's on record, that the two belligerent have to talk about peace, have to refer to United Nations resolutions. We were not telling anybody to commit any acts of violence. We are a force of moderation in the region. You can check it out, sir, with sources in this country about Tunisia's role and about Tunisia's stand against terrorism.
Can women vote in Tunisia?
You touch on a very touchy subject for men. First, because we are the first country in the Muslim world to have given the right of vote to women. They represent 51% of our population. Believe me, they are strong. We found them universities, on court, judges, lawyers, police forces, in the army, in the parliament, and our law is very clear on the rights of women. I'll invite you to come to Tunisia and chat with our women. Believe me, they are powerful as you are, ladies here.
The question is, would you be willing to comment upon the internal situation in Algeria with respect to Muslim fundamentalism and democracy?
Yeah. Let me say first that Tunisia's recipe for democracy is not an item for export. We do strongly believe in non-interference in other, especially neighbors' affairs. We think that what is happening in Algeria is a domestic Algerian affair, but it depends on which course it would take. It will have a far-reaching repercussion in the region and throughout the world. We think that the democratic process which started in Algeria is not dead. There are more political parties in Algeria than you can think about. But my honest opinion is that when you mix up politics with violence, because one party, and they had a political party there with a religious platform, think that he has a monopoly of truth. You remember what happened in the Middle Ages in Europe. You remember what happened, say it, in Iran. We have plenty of lessons about the danger of letting through the democratic process a party that can grow and then kill democracy. We learned our lesson from history, the Weimar Republic in Germany, how Nazism and fascism started in Europe. That's Tunisia's opinion. This is a growing, emerging democracy. When people start competing for political public posts on the basis of I am more Muslim than you are, or I am more nationalistic than you are. You remember what happened in the Middle East in the 60s when one country started competing on that ground. We have other fish to fry. So we wish the Algerian good luck, and I think they have plenty of human resources, plenty of talents, politicians, to distinguish from what is best for Algerian democracy.
Has the resignation of Secretary of State Baker had a negative effect upon the peace process?
First, being a foreign minister, I cannot comment on domestic policy of this country, although following it up with a lot of interest. Jim Baker is a very close friend of mine. But I think the momentum that was built up and the confidence that is building up on the peace process, the break of the ice has already started. And the training for dialogue is already proven itself as a positive factor. And the team around Jim Baker, Secretary Baker, is still around. I don't think that Mr. Baker, less than a mile far from the foggy bottom, can forget about the peace process. This is a moral commitment, not only of this nation, but all Middle Eastern nations, to stick to the peace process and try to produce some results before it's too late.
Would you comment on the prospects for employment of the youth of the area and its relationship to political stability?
It's a good question. I think I agree with you that the basic conditions that made this phenomenon grow, I'll make a distinction. The phenomena grew all over the world because of the failure of ideologies, a return to religion in Christianity, among Muslims and among Jews. I'm not talking about that. That's a phenomena, worldwide phenomena, and I'm not concerned about it. What I'm concerned about is a phenomena that is taking advantage of the feelings of the people for exploitation, even through intimidation and acts of violence, to take over power. So that's the distinction between the two phenomena. Of course, this grows on a number of economic conditions, social conditions, unemployment, yes. And what we have been doing in rural areas in Tunisia is quite important. But it needs time to be a success. The Tunisian economic policy is known to have been very pragmatic. We didn't embark in prestigious projects. We did manage our debt very rationally. We love going to clubs. There are two clubs, an association that we didn't go to, the Paris Club and the London Club, for rescheduling of our debt. Because we still remember that in 1881, French protectorate came to Tunisia because of a question of debt. The king of that time didn't pay his debt on time. So are cautious. So development, but sailing in troubled waters, in time of hardship throughout the world. How to create maximum jobs, but also how to train your people. We are the first country in Africa to have convinced the World Bank. Our ambassador was at that time, Deputy Chief of Mission in Washington, to have convinced the World Bank to give an educational loan to Tunisia in 1965, I think. And since that time, we have been spending a third of our budget in education. A third of our budget in education. That means we want to have trained people, but of course not unemployed. We change the economic policy. Instead of having state-oriented policy, it's free market-oriented policy, and it's producing results. But we cannot hide that the problem of unemployment is at the basic of this phenomena, because those people found their recruits in those regions, pockets of poverty. But also there is another explanation. I think targeting North Africa through this phenomena from countries far away, be it in the Middle East, in Iran, or in Sudan, to train people for terrorist activities under the name of religion, and to destabilize countries, is not a Tunisian responsibility, but it's a worldwide responsibility. To tell loud and clear, and we have been saying that in regional groupings, in the Arab League, in the Organization of African Unity, recently in the non-aligned movement, that the sacred principle of non-interference should apply not only to ideology, but also those who are using a new type of ideology to interfere in the domestic affairs of others. And I think it's both domestic preconditions and also exploitation from abroad of this phenomena for God knows what purposes.
The question is, would you comment upon your military strength and perhaps others in light of Iran's enormous military strength?
I said we didn't engage in any arms race in the region. We have a minimum credible defense system made for deterrent capabilities. But we cannot compete with the forces you mentioned. The strength of Tunisia is in its people. The strength of Tunisia is in its economy. The strength of Tunisia in its circle of friends and friendship. The strength of Tunisia is in its abidance by United Nations Charter. Might sound Ethiopia, but talking about the 21st century, I think those who are tempted to go back to the old system of balance of terror and balance of powers would be again condemned by history, because this is not the way to peace. At a time when the superpowers are destroying weapons, at a time when we're discussing in Geneva new conventions for destruction of weapons, from chemical to destructive other type of weapons, to see some nations going the old way, thinking that security best protected by accumulation and compiling very outdated types of machines and gun machines and submarines, I think this is an old game, but is not in conformity with the new world order.
The question is the relationship between politics and religion in your country in proportion to the relationship, that same relationship in Turkey?
You're referring to Turkey's experience in political life, which started with Kemal Atatürk, separation between mosque and religion. And it has produced reaction inside Turkey itself. Read your history. I think our own experimentation is to accept that religion, Islam, is a tolerant religion, but has a global interpretation of life. It's at the same time a religion and a code of conduct, moral conduct. The Sunni interpretation, especially the Maliki sect living in North Africa, did a lot of research and interpretation in the Holy Book. And it started from the old mosque of Tunisia. We've spoken about Carthage. I would like to speak about another old city, the first city built by the Arabs in North Africa, Kairouan, with the largest mosque in North Africa. And out of Kairouan and out of the Zitouna Mosque in the capital grew a concept of a religion which is in harmony with the specific people living in North Africa. Don't forget, we are Mediterranean also. Don't forget that we have been, don't quote me on this please, drinking wine, because we are producing wine since the Phoenicians came to Tunisia, not the Romans. So grew out of this experimentation a particular sense of life and religion, religion and politics, that out of Tunisia was expanded up to Fez in Marrakesh, in Morocco. And that prevailed up to recently, until the Iranian Revolution came with this new ideology and started investing in a number of countries, including North Africa. So I would say that it's not clear-cut like the Turkish experimentation. We are proud of being good Muslim. We are proud of our heritage and our roots, but we are what we are. We have our own experience. It's only less than 60 miles far from Italy. So we have interacted with Western civilization for centuries. We have our own specific ideas of how to come up with a compromise between modernism, politics in the modern age, and religion, which is a fundamental human, deep feeling and a matter between man and God. Thank you for your attention.